Hadrian, Publius Aelius Hadrianus Augustus, was a Roman emperor from 117 to 138. Hadrian is known for building Hadrian's Wall, which marked the northern limit of Britannia. He also rebuilt the Pantheon and constructed the Temple of Venus Rome. Hadrian was one of the 5 good emperors of Rome, with Nerva, Trajan, Antonius Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. The 5 good emperors were the ideal rulers who earned their respects from their good works, their care for the people, and respect for the power of the Senate. They were also all adopted by the previous emperor, meaning that they were chosen for their virtues rather than being naturally born into power. Hadrian was born Publius Aelius Hadrianus in either Italica, from a well-established Roman family with centuries-old roots in Italica, Hispania Baetica, the Republic in Hispania Ulterior, near the present-day location of Seville, Spain. Although it was an accepted part of Hadrian's personal history that he was born in Spain, his Historia Augusta biography states that he was born in Rome on the 24th of January, 76, of an ethnically Hispanic with vague paternal links to Italy. However, this may be a complementary fiction coined in order to make Hadrian appear as a natural-born Roman instead of a provincial, since his parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents were all born and raised in Hispania. His father was Publius Aurelius Hadrianus Afer, who was a senator of praetorian rank, would spend much of his time in Rome away from his homeland of Hispania. Hadrian's elder sister and only sibling was Aelia Domitia Paulina, married with the triple consul Lucius Julius Ursus Sevianus. His parents died in 86 when Hadrian was 10, and the boy then became a ward of both Trajan and Publius Acilius Attianus, who was later Trajan's praetorian prefect. Hadrian was schooled in various subjects particular to young aristocrats of the day, and was so fond of learning Greek literature that he was nicknamed Grossulus, Greekling. Hadrian visited Italica when he was 14 years old, when he was recalled by Trajan, who thereafter looked after his development. He never returned to Italica, although it was later made a colonia in his honor. It was at this time he married Trajan's grandniece, Vibia Sabina, in a move that seemed to have been conceived by the Empress Plotina, on whose favor he always counted. Also, he counted on the support of the bride's mother, Trajan's niece Solonia Matidia, daughter of Trajan's sister, Ulpia Marciana. However, Trajan seemed to be far less enthusiastic. The subsequent relationship between Hadrian and Sabina was exceptionally and scandalously poor, even for a marriage of convenience. It was at that time, in his mid-20s, that Hadrian traveled to Greece, where he attended the lectures of the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, at the time living in the city of Nicopolis. He was also eponymous archon in Athens for a brief time, and he was elected an Athenian citizen. The Athenians awarded Hadrian a statue with an inscription in the Theatre of Dionysus, offering a detailed account of his cursus honorum, which confirms and expands the one in Historia Augusta. Hadrian's career before Trajan's death was a regular one for a high-ranking Roman senator, but without any particular distinction benefiting in heir designate. After the 112th Athenian Archonate, we hear no more of Hadrian before Trajan's Parthian War, and it's possible that he remained in Greece until being summoned into the imperial retinue. Hadrian was involved in the wars against the Dacians, and reputedly won awards from Trajan for his successes. Hadrian's military skill was not well attested due to lack of military action during his reign. However, his keen interest in and knowledge of the army and his demonstrated skill of leadership show possible strategic talent. Hadrian joined Trajan's expedition against Parthia as a legate on Trajan's staff. Neither during the first victorious phase nor during the second phase of the war, when rebellions swept Mesopotamia, did Hadrian do anything of note. However, when the governor of Syria had to be sent to sort out renewed troubles in Dacia, Hadrian was appointed as a replacement, giving him an independent command. Hadrian was well known, respected, and liked. The Emperor Trajan knew and trusted him very well. When Trajan became very sick, he officially adopted Hadrian as his heir, meaning that Hadrian would become the next emperor. Successions of power are always tricky, but they can be especially rough if the new ruler is not the actual son of the old one. However, Hadrian had full support of the military, and soon the Senate in Rome officially recognized the legitimacy of his adoption. Hadrian had a good mind for military strategy, but had not actually fought much and didn't care for war. He abandoned the conquest to include Mesopotamia in the empire, which Trajan had started, and averted rebellion in Iran with peace negotiations. He also kept the army intact, well supplied and well trained. Hadrian actually increased soldiers' training, personally inspected them, and even ate and slept amongst the soldiers. Hadrian's policy was to maintain peace through strength. In this attitude, he built a series of fortifications and walls all around the empire along strategic areas like the Danube and Rhine rivers. The most famous of these is Hadrian's Wall, an 80-mile wall that spans the entire latitudinal width of Britain from sea to sea. The Roman army had been fighting the Celtic people of Britain for some time, and the wall served to keep the Celts north of Roman territory. Hadrian commissioned lots of art for Roman public spaces and sponsored many building projects, including aqueducts for fresh water, bathhouses, amphitheaters, and temples. He had the Pantheon rebuilt. It had previously been destroyed by a fire in 80 AD. The new Pantheon was built with a dome, an engineering marvel that had been nearly impossible to create before, because domes must support their own weight and require a perfect combination of light but strong materials and skill. Hadrian himself designed the Temple of Venus in Roma, which honored two of the most important deities of Rome. It was placed above the foundations of Emperor Nero's Golden House, a lavish palace Nero had built for himself while the Roman people suffered, and made open to the people as a place of worship and meeting. The Temple of Venus in Roma was the largest temple of ancient Rome, at 476 feet long, 328 feet wide, and 97 feet tall. It was a display of the ingenuity and skill of Roman engineering. The Hadrian's Villa, constructed at Tibur as a retreat from Rome and Roman Emperor Hadrian during the 2nd and 3rd decades of the 2nd century AD. Hadrian was said to dislike the palace on the Palatine Hill in Rome, leading to the construction of the retreat. During the later years of his reign, he actually governed the empire from the villa. Hadrian moved to the villa as his official residence around 128 AD. A large court, therefore, lived there permanently. The postal service kept it in contact with Rome, 29 kilometers, 18 miles away. Hadrian's Villa is a vast area of land with many pools, baths, fountains, and classical Greek architecture. The site's buildings are constructions in travertine, lime, pozzolana, and tufa. The complex contains over 30 buildings, covering an area of at least 1 square kilometer. One of the most striking and best preserved parts of the villa consists of a pool named Canopus and an artificial grotto named Serapeum. An Egyptian city named Canopus was where a temple named Serapeum was dedicated to the god Serapis. Hadrian's Pesile, located inside the villa, was a huge garden surrounded by a swimming pool and an arcade. The pool's dimensions measure 232 by 97 meters. Originally, the pool was surrounded by 4 walls with colonnaded interior. These columns helped to support the roof. In the center of the quadriportico was a large rectangular pool. The 4 walls create a peaceful solitude for Hadrian and guests. One structure in the villa is the so-called Maritime Theater. It consists of a round portico with a barrel vault supported by pillars. Inside the portico was a ring-shaped pool with a central island. The Piazza d'Oro, Golden Square, is the first and best-known peristyle, celebrated for the prominence of its stunning architectural design. Its large, nearly square-shaped atrium on the northeast end of the villa with a double portico, which on the open side is supported by 60 alternative granite. On the southeastern side was the octagonal imperial room, formed by alternative convex and concave walls. This led to the adjoining rooms, once decorated with exquisite marble friezes and wonderful statues. When Hadrian first became the Roman emperor in 118 AD, he was sympathetic to the Jews. He allowed them to return to Jerusalem and granted permission for the rebuilding of their holy temple. The Jews' expectations rose as they made organizational and financial preparations to rebuild the temple. Hadrian quickly went back on his word, however, and requested that the site of the temple be moved from its original location. He also began deporting Jews to North Africa. The Jews prepared to rebel until Rabbi Joshua ben Hananiah calmed them. The Jews then satisfied themselves with preparing secretly in case a rebellion would later become necessary. They built hideouts in caves and did shoddy work building weapons so that the Romans would reject the weapons and return them to the Jews. The Jews organized guerrilla forces and in 123 AD began launching surprise attacks against the Romans. From that point on, life only got worse for the Jews. Hadrian brought an extra army legion, the 6th Ferrata, into Judea to deal with the terrorism. Hadrian hated foreign religions and forbade the Jews to perform circumcisions. He appointed Tineius Rufus governor of Judea. Rufus was a harsh ruler who took advantage of Jewish women. In approximately 132 AD, Hadrian began to establish a city of Jerusalem called Aelia Capitolina, the name being a combination of his own name and that of the Roman god Jupiter Capitolonius. He started to build a temple to Jupiter in place of the Jewish Holy Temple. The final battle of the war took place in Bethar, Bar Kokhba's headquarters, which housed both the Sanhedrin, Jewish high court, and the home of the Nasi leader. Bethar was a vital military stronghold because of its strategic location on a mountain ridge overlooking both the valley of Sorek and the important Jerusalem Beit Givrin road. Thousands of Jewish refugees fled to Bethar during the war. In 135 AD, Hadrian's army besieged Bethar, and on the 9th of Av, the Jewish fast day commemorating the destruction of their first and second holy temples, the walls of Bethar fell. After a fierce battle, every Jew in Bethar was killed. 6 days passed before the Romans allowed the Jews to bury their dead. Following the Battle of Bethar, there were a few small skirmishes in the Judean desert caves, but the war was essentially over and Judean independence was lost. The Romans plowed Jerusalem with a yoke of oxen. Jews were sold into slavery and many were transported to Egypt. Judean settlements were not rebuilt. Jerusalem was turned into a pagan city called Aelia Capitolina, and the Jews were forbidden to live there. They were permitted to enter only on the 9th of Av to mourn their losses in the revolt. Hadrian changed the country's name from Judea to Syria Palestina. Hadrian married in about 100 AD, but we do not know much about the life of his wife and empress Vibia Sabina. Sabina's image was put on the official coinage, and there are many statues of her. However, ancient sources make it very clear that Hadrian formed a homosexual relationship with a young Greek male called Antinous. Homosexual relationships were not considered unusual in ancient Rome, but the intensity with which Hadrian mourned Antinous' premature death was without precedent. Hadrian visited Egypt in 130 AD along with the imperial entourage, including his wife and Antinous. They embarked on a voyage up the river Nile, and on 24th of October, Antinous drowned in the river. On the same day, the locals were commemorating the death by drowning in the Nile of the Egyptian goddess Osiris. Although Hadrian maintained Antinous' death was an accident, malicious rumors soon spread. Some thought he'd committed suicide or that he'd been sacrificed. Others claimed Antinous sacrificed himself to prolong the life of the emperor. Near the end of his life, Hadrian continued the tradition of adopting an heir to be his successor and selected Lucius Cionius Commodus, who fell sick and died. He next adopted Titus Aurelius, who was recognized as emperor by the Senate in 138 AD and took the name Antonius Pius. Hadrian died in 138 AD of heart failure at 62 years old. He was cremated, and his remains were placed inside an enormous mausoleum designed by Hadrian and built by Antonius Pius. It was the tallest building in Rome at the time.